Okay, so as we go to the PowerPoint, we have, this is more of an administrative role section. So this is about you thinking about all the things that go on behind the scenes outside of just specific client care and theories and clinical skills. Whoops. Okay, so the focus on this is going to be about overall counselor well-being support. What are the current rates, codes that we have to follow? Those are constantly changing. So as part of administrative person is knowing what the current things are with the guidelines and different things in practice. And those vary by time, last year versus this year. It varies by state. It varies by type of agency. For example, certain agencies that provide certain billings can't hire someone with a criminal record, where a private practice or a nonprofit agency that's grant funded might be able to. So there's just a lot of different rules and stuff that an administrator has to be aware of and learn. And you always just want to look for the most updated resources. Some of the things that constantly change, constantly have to be learned, is regarding record keeping, how we take our notes, what has to be in our notes, our type of treatment planning, how we are reimbursed. Our reimbursement is impacted by our payer sources, so that's where there's an ongoing change there. To give you a little bit of an example of how that changes, is it wasn't until COVID happened that there was a lot of services that were never allowed prior to COVID's impact of us being able to bill for virtual services, especially for things like case management or school services. How our record keeping is done and the progress notes that we have are incredibly important to the billing process, and our treatment plan needs to be very reflective of that specific client, and we're going to go over those in more detail. I put this here because it is kind of funny. That's kind of how you feel. Like, we're going to see what happens. We're going to run some tests and see how your insurance reacts, because there's so many different insurance plans out there that learning those is an incredibly vital a part of an administrator. Just knowing like what is covered, what is not covered, what will be covered, and what you have to do to get reimbursement. Who has to be your like, for example, in most states, if you are a resident in counseling, you can bill for therapy as a resident in counseling for outpatient services. However, private insurance companies will only let you bill if you're fully licensed and have already completed your residency. So those are just like an example of reimbursement differences. Overall, when you're talking about integrated behavioral health, when we talk about integration, we talk about having more than one type of facility under the same roof. So in most cases, that integration is really focusing on like medical staff also being there, other stakeholders providing services in private or public facilities that have to also require different types of licensing, pre-authorizations, those types of things. So if you've ever got a medication that needed a pre-authorization, you know what I'm talking about, where the doctor has to fill out so many things. Well, there's a lot of times where, whether it's medical or mental health, that there has to be pre-authorizations, that they have to pre-approve that before you can bill it. And so understanding reimbursement practices and what has to be done for each different type of billing is a very big factor of administration. The second insight that it talks about is what do you have to do for each person in your facility. So if you think about the people that bill in your facility, you're thinking about case managers, you're thinking about maybe you have therapists, maybe you have doctors, maybe you have prescribers, maybe you have nurses in your infrastructure. But those people get paid all different salaries. But then you have people that are in quality assurance, frontline staff, record keeping staff, HR staff, your IT department, all of those people don't bill. So, how much do you have to have each person that bills to cover the entire facility to, like, at least be able to pay all the bills and keep the doors open? That's a big factor when you're talking about building an agency. So, when you're creating your discussion board, those are things that you want to think about. You don't want to have one person that bills that's got to cover all the other non-billable people as well. Insight number 3, you've got commercial payer opportunities for support beyond regular reimbursement. So these might be different things like I don't know if you've had the opportunity, but there's a lot of facilities now that you pay a fee monthly, and you can come and see the doctor at any point. You just pay to have that doctor as your primary that agency. So you could be going in to see a therapist, you could go in and see a prescriber, you could go in and see a medical provider, but you pay like $100 a month whether you use it or not. That would be like a global payment or pay for performance type thing. There's also like grants that can be written to cover different types of specific things that you provide that might be more on psychoeducational or preventive things. And that would be more commercial payer type things that might cover your trainings, it might cover your vehicle costs, those type of things. In addition to, like, I provided this service, and this is what this service costs. So you have other sources that can be some type of revenue for your agency. Insight number 4, downstream cost saving, long-term value of integrated models. So some of the things that this is talking about is some of the things that eat up cost is a crisis service, trying to provide stabilization to critical clients, trying to decrease hospitalization, really high medical cost. And some of this might be part of that prevention, education. But when we're talking about an integrated system, we're talking about a comprehensive style of care. So when you have doctors, nurses, and mental health working together, the goal of this decrease in need is for everybody to be working together. Something even as simple as coordinating clients in a way that their case management appointments and their therapy appointments or their medical appointments are all scheduled to where the person can access public transportation. You know, a lot of people are doing them like the Medicaid cabs type stuff. So maybe having that to where those are coordinated in a way that while they're there, maybe their labs can be done because we know that they were having to get an appointment for the labs, so they could go ahead and have an appointment while they're there. Other things might be like the warm handoffs, like scheduling appointments to where when this person is done seeing their case manager, the case manager can walk them down and then hand them off to the medical staff because that's the next thing that they need to do. So you want to avoid using emergency style services, and if your medical people and your mental health behavioral people are working together, we can keep our clients more educated. We know what's going on, and we also know that their care is more comprehensive, and that should avoid as much crisis as if that didn't happen. Another example could be even as simple as having someone with diabetes. If their case manager didn't know that their case manager might be the person that tells the doctor, hey, you can't prescribe this person insulin that has to be refrigerated because they don't have a home. So we need to be mindful of that when you're prescribing medications that need to be refrigerated, and maybe instead prescribe something else, or maybe they don't always have consistent electricity. Different things that when we're working together we can monitor better, we can provide more comprehensive services and holistic care than if we're not integrated in our services. When writing notes, so when you're thinking about how do you help as an administrative person, how do you help these things happen? Education, training, those type things. But we have psychotherapy notes, and those are the notes that as clinicians we write about what we feel are going on, we need to monitor for. Those are not viewable or obtainable to clients or law or any others. Those are ours. Those are like our private journals. However, our progress notes that talk about what the client reported, talks about their functional impairment, their diagnosis, where they are on their treatment plan and their goals. Those are progress notes that are provided in their medical history. One of the most important things is when you do an intake with somebody, and when you're, as an administrator, you're teaching people how things should match. When an intake is done, that is when a diagnosis is put with that person. So when you talk about a diagnosis to treatment planning to progress notes, those should align. That person's note should reflect their treatment plan. And their treatment plan should reflect why they're there in the first place for whatever diagnosis that they've come in for to address the symptoms that they've reported. Those three things should always align. If they're not aligning, then something needs to be updated or changed, to whether the diagnosis needs to be updated and changed, to whether new goals and things need to be updated and changed. Those all should still be reflected congruently with that progress notes as the client progresses through treatment. A lot of times we all get overwhelmed with paperwork, and paperwork is different whether or not you work in a private facility versus a public facility, just because of the guidelines that you have to work under. But no matter what, we have to do some type of progress notes. And it really stresses the fact that progress notes are a way to justify that this person is coming in for a reason, and that reason is billable. So you really want to make sure that they're well kept, that they're very specific and focused, that we don't use just vague comments in the sense that we don't want to say that it says here, building a rapport is much more than socializing and venting. It is not. You want to remove the fluff from your notes. You want to be able to go in there, read the note, and see what the client's issues are, what they're doing to work on it, and you want to report that in a way that is showing evidence. Progress notes should be clear and concise. You want to be able to look at that and recognize that you are constantly at each session evaluating that treatment plan. Like, is that person meeting their goals? How is their insight? What is still the challenges, or what are their impairments that they're still working on? Things that says, hey, this is a good progress note, a good STOP note, a good DAP note, a good burp note, whatever your agency is requiring that you write. The content of those notes need to address the treatment plan. They need to talk about anything that has set the client back, triggers, what symptoms are still going on, whether they've gotten worse or better. You need to be able to talk about why this person, your note reflects why you're still able to bill for services. So you want to constitute something that says there's still a necessity for me to bill and somebody to pay for this. And you also want to address different type of things like their limitations, their strengths, because that's what we can build upon or know that the person needs to still continue to grow in. I think we've covered most of this already. Sometimes you may talk about like the family of origin, whether that was something they reported or something that is a source of strength or a source of challenging for the client. You should talk about what the specific statements include. Like it says, session focused on the 4 times client has been hospitalized for suicidal gestures. So you don't have to talk about everything that the client talked about. You have to put summaries in there of what the context of the conversation was. So you don't have to go down through there and say, well, the first one, da-da-da-da, and the second one, da-da-da-da. You're just saying that that's what the session focus was on, and that's those generalizable statements that allow you to have content without having to write every single thing the client says. You want those generalized statements. Client asks for ways to deal with their anxiety or depression. Some interventions just were explored and discussed, and the client made goals to implement these. Like, you don't want to be too specific in what the client's reporting to you. You want to show that what you're doing in your progress note is addressing the treatment plans of that client. So here's some, so maybe the goal was increase self-esteem. The objective might be to list 2 positive behaviors per week. The second objective might be to employ 3 assertive behaviors per week. So that's what the client's supposed to be doing. That's what the client's overall goal. So in a progress note, you might write something like, worked on objective 1B by role-playing various assertive behaviors. Additional statements could indicate specific issues and interventions being employed to address treatment plan objectives. So basically it's saying, like, did you ask if they've been doing this? What did they say? Have they been accomplishing it? Do they need to learn more ways of being assertive or more ways of being positive through the week to meet that treatment plan? And are they following through with it? This just continues on what I just said. You want to talk about what therapeutic interventions you're using in session and what techniques they are using outside of session that matches the treatment plan of the goal in the first place. You also want to always address like what kind of behavioral and emotional type things that you note. They might tell you some stuff, and those are reported by the client, but there's also observations that we need to make. And so when you're hearing all this information, what I want you to be processing is, yeah, I already know all this. Okay, because we're doing this, but how do I make sure my staff are knowing this? How do I make sure my staff, my employees, my agency that I've created, how do I make sure this is done? How do I make sure they know how to do this? And here's one of the things, like it says that we have to be really careful when we use like percentages. It says the child continues to demonstrate defiant behaviors as evidenced by yelling at their mother 3 times during session, telling the therapist, this is stupid, you're stupid, and refusing to answer questions over 50% of the time. So that's a very specific observation that we're writing a note, and those are what you're looking for. And we're going to get into some other things that show you like the wrong way to use types of percentages here coming up. And this is just some more examples of medical necessities, like things of how to document correctly versus incorrectly. What are they doing? What is the client reporting that their symptoms are, and what are they doing? How are they using interventions that you've taught them outside according to their treatment plan? The next section goes into like what does a SOAP note and a DAP note have in it, what pieces go where. So this is just an outline descriptor. We should know this information, but it gives you like an outline of the different things that should be in a SOAP note versus a DAP note. And the next section here gives you an idea of what is different in a poorly written note, demonstrating what is in the same context, the same information. How does that look like when it's written properly? So you can see this section here is like spouse is cheating on him, not communicating well, complaining about the spouse, job, and police. And here it talks about they appear nervous, tense, guarded, upset, blaming of others, because these are more terms that speak specifically to symptomology, and that's how we want our notes to be written. This is just some more criteria that we've already actually covered about treatment planning versus reimbursement. About reimbursement can also be refused for not providing required specifiers, certain diagnoses. So when we went into the DSM-5, we got all these specifiers and V codes. They have to be put in there, and our payer sources can literally just say, denied, I'm not paying for that assessment because you did not provide the specifiers that are required for that diagnosis. Those are things as an administrator that are a big deal to us, because we don't want to pay an employee 3 hours to do a clinical assessment and then not get paid for it from the payer source because one piece of information was left off. So again, as an administrator, how are you going to ensure those top things? And I do realize that this class is outside of what, if you've not been in a supervisory role, are things that you've never thought of. That's kind of the whole purpose of this class, and it's also why it's important for us to give feedback to each other in these discussion boards to help each other think with a different hat on than we may have ever wore before. In your treatment planning, when you're talking about your treatment planning, you're wanting to be able to address strengths, needs, abilities, and address the person's symptoms and their functional impairments in the treatment plan. You want to be very direct. Your treatment plans should be measurable. They should be doable. They should be within reason. For example, if someone comes in and their diagnosis has to do with an addiction, any addiction, whether it's a process addiction or whether it's a mental health diagnosis, to say that all of a sudden this person is not going to do this anymore. If a kid is hitting everybody in school every single day and you make an objective that they will no longer hit, you just set that person up for failure. Reduction is where you want to start. You don't want to say client will no longer use marijuana ever again. Those are things that you are doing that will set a client up for failure. So as an administrator, it's very important to remind people that, one, the clients need to participate in their own goals and objectives. Somewhere has to be started. That is a fluid document that can change as the client improves or needs change. Not an end-all be-all that only happens once. So you got to start somewhere and start with reduction. This just gives you some more ideas about treatment planning. Some of this information you're going to use in your quiz, so it's here for you. But it talks about like having things put in a time-bound thing of like, we'll do this on a weekly basis, this many times a week. We'll have this done this month, those type things, making it time-bound. Tips for third-party payers: avoid vague objectives like increased communication skills, because that really can't be measured. Increase from what point? So don't use words. You want to say increase or decrease, add or change, but you have to make it quantifiable. So we'll increase by doing this 2 times a week, or we'll decrease by reducing to 1 time a day, or those type things. You want to be very specific. And here's an example of using percentages. It says the client is 75% depressed is a poor way. Because what is 75%? So instead, you might say client misses school 75% of the time, which is more specific and more quantifiable. If things have changed, you want to be able to say it's valid change. So you want to say specifics again, quantifiable, specific, measurable. Those are very important things when you are going to be audited by a payer source or a state entity. It says initiate an average of 2 social interactions per week by August 10th. That's very specific, valid, showing that they're going to improve in some way. So those are good examples. If treatment goes to full course, discharge should be talked about as part of the beginning. Your goal is to discharge a case. We hate to early terminate because we've lost contact with people, but most of the time people drop out of services because they don't want to tell us that they don't want to come back, or they don't want to tell us that they feel like that they've had enough. The way to not cause a clinician to work twice as hard to make sure a person is not able to be reached or not going to come back is to be able to talk about discharge as part of treatment from the get-go. And so that ends this section. If you have any questions, please let me know.